there might have been a very good reason just to get rid of Starovoit and say that it was a suicide. This is kind of standard practice for the Kremlin, because he had a lot of Starovoit had a lot of connections, in particular with Arkady Rotenberg, who had gotten a lot of contracts in Kursk for building their road infrastructure and everything. And so I think that it was probably better not to open up this Pandora's box and have all these things going on. Just better to silence Starovoit.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are joined by specialist in Soviet and Russian affairs, Amy Knight. Amy's written and taught extensively about Russian politics and history. Her most recent book is The Kremlin's Noose, Putin's bitter feud with the oligarch who made him ruler of Russia. Amy, welcome back to Frontline. Great to see you again. So this book that you wrote was about the famous case of the life and mysterious death of Boris Berzovski, who was found in the bathroom with a ligature around his neck in England 12 years ago. And there has been a succession of cases since of mysterious deaths, the latest being that of Roman Starovoit, who has just been sacked as transport minister and then hours later found dead, either in his car or next to his car or in a parking lot with a gunshot. Can you explain to us the circumstances and the theories as to what happened to him?
Well, Starovoit was really an up-and-coming official, doing very well. He had been governor of the Kursk district for a number of years, and then last year he was moved to become Minister of Transportation. And his successor, who had also been kind of working as his deputy in Kursk, Alexei Smirnov, was at the beginning of this year, was arrested along with several other officials in connection with a criminal investigation of why the defenses in Kursk had not been stronger, so that they would have prevented this incursion of Ukrainian forces. You'll recall that about a year, August 2024, Ukrainian forces actually moved into Kursk, and it was pretty bad for Russia, just in terms of it didn't look good to have their own country invaded. So anyway, you always have to find somebody to blame. And so there was an investigation, and Smirnov was arrested. But obviously, because Starovoit had been the governor during all this time, where all these, where their defenses were supposed to be constructed. I mean, he didn't work for the Ministry of Defense, but it was part of the job of a governor to make sure that they're protected. So apparently, Starovoit must have obviously felt very nervous about this situation anyway. So I don't think this was just sort of sudden, and this is why the idea that he committed suicide, they found a gun and they said that he shot himself. He got out of his car near his home and shot himself. But the problem with that is that he already knew that there was this investigation going on. And yes, Putin had decided to sack Starovoit as Minister of Transportation. But again, this probably didn't come as a surprise. So he himself hadn't yet been, Starovoit hadn't been implicated, but there were rumors that Alexei Smirnov was cooperating with the investigation and that he was going to be implicating Starovoit. So, I mean, my take would be that this is something ongoing, and that there was also, and of course, the Russian media, particularly the independent media outside that isn't controlled by the state. Um, there's been a lot of speculation about murder or suicide, but I would say that there might have been a very good reason just to get rid of Starovoit and say that it was a suicide. This is kind of standard practice for the Kremlin, because he had a lot of Starovoit had a lot of connections, in particular with Arkady Rotenberg, who had gotten a lot of contracts in Kursk for building their road infrastructure and everything. And so I think that it was probably better not to open up this Pandora's box and have all these things going on. Just better to silence Starovoit. But we probably won't know.
And this comes in the aftermath of absolute chaos across multiple Russian airports, forced to close and hundreds of flights cancelled. That was blamed on Ukrainian drone activity and thought to have cost the airlines around up to £200 million over 2 days. I mean, this is exactly the kind of humiliation that causes heads to roll in Russia, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I guess in some ways the Russian Ministry of Transportation might, you could blame them for part of it, but basically it's Russia's air defenses that, the threat of these drones on Moscow and St. Petersburg on the airports is pretty scary, that they can't protect that, their infrastructure that far into Russia. And I think the problem here is that Russia's a huge country. It's the biggest country in the world, and the distances are tremendous. So all the flights from the Far East and all the stands, and which aren't technically part of Russia, but all these flights tend to, if they're going further, they tend to go either through Moscow or St. Petersburg. So when there's a threat of a drone attack, it shuts down the entire country's transportation network. And then also apparently the internet communications were shut down. And so it was a real disaster for a lot of Russian citizens, because this is peak travel time. And I think the bad part for the Kremlin is that the Kremlin has tried to kind of keep everyday Russians from kind of worrying too much about the war, and they've called it a special military operation. It's not a war, and so on and so forth. And so far Russians seem to be living their ordinary lives, except of course for the soldiers who are fighting at the front. But something like this makes Russians really, really, really feel vulnerable. And I think that, Putin has tried so hard to show everybody that he is this wonderful commander and that everything is under control. This really undermines that. And I think it's dangerous for the Kremlin.
It's really interesting when you say that Putin wants people to be, he almost wants them not to be recognizing that the cost of the war in Ukraine. And Moscow is currently enjoying this 3-month festival called the Summer in Moscow. Great floral displays, culmination of years of renovation and infrastructure improvement. That is obviously trying to counter the kind of things that we saw with the airports. At the moment, is the Kremlin actually winning over the people and encouraging them successfully to be in denial about the war and to choose not to face the realities of it?
That's a very good question. And of course, it's difficult to gauge. I mean, I think the average Russian would rather not think about the war. And so they're happy when they're given a kind of a diversion, like what you were mentioning. But again, these situations where they have airports shut down and the cities are threatened by drone attacks, it kind of counters that impression. Now, I haven't seen any opinion polling, but it'd be interesting. Probably something will come out, how the average Russian, I mean, thus far as Russians have been quite supportive of Putin and the war, although they do want peace. There's no question about that. But they haven't questioned the average Russian, according to opinion polls, are not questioning their leader's wisdom. But it's I think it's going to become harder to divert their attention from what's happening.
Just to return to the series of unexplained deaths that have been carried out, I'm just interested that have happened. I shouldn't say carried out, but the unexplained deaths, the incidents of them. I mean, a few days before of the death of Roman Starovoit, there was this Andrei Badalov, who it's claimed killed himself, and that's TASS, the state-owned news agency, that said that he fell from an apartment in Moscow. He was vice president of a state-controlled oil pipeline company, Transneft, and a string of unexplained deaths of senior executives in Russia's energy sector. How does that go down in Russia itself? And how is this? How do you explain the instance of these deaths since has been an increase since the war in Ukraine?
Oh, definitely. People falling or jumping out of windows. Yes, definitely. This is a problem. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I haven't seen that Badalov was actually involved in any kind of a corruption. He was, as you said, vice president of Transneft, and obviously a very powerful position. Again, I mean, I think it's kind of unusual that that someone would. Apparently, there are reports that there was a suicide note, but again, it is a little bit odd to decide to kill yourself by jumping out of an apartment window, because first of all, you don't really know for sure that it's going to work. And I don't know, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me. I would suspect that probably behind this is some sort of another a corruption case that is being investigated that we didn't know about, and somebody thought it was important to kind of shut this Badalov, to keep him out of the picture or get him out of the picture. But again, we don't. I don't know too much, too much about that. But there have been a large number of very, very strange deaths, and this also comes together with a big increase in corruption investigations and sentencing. Well, you're probably familiar with Shoigu, who used to be the Minister of Defense and now is the head of the National Security Council. Well, one of his top deputies, Timur Ivanov, was sentenced to given a very long prison sentence for corruption within the Ministry of Defense. And of course, this cast a shadow on Shoigu. He is still head of the National Security Council. He's also a hunting and fishing buddy of Putin. But there's been, it seems to me, I mean, let me put it this way. It's well known, and a lot of this comes from Alexei Navalny's reporting over the years, that the Ministry of Defense was very corrupt, and they were siphoning off funds and taking trips to fancy islands with a bunch of generals. I mean, it was well known. So it's interesting that these decisions are made to single out people and focus on them. And again, it's complicated, but it probably has to do with cover-ups and this and that. But I think it's interesting that at this time, when Russia is still engaged in this conflict, that there are these criminal investigations for corruption, and there are quite a few of them. And then next to that, you have these strange deaths. So I think the whole thing is probably a little bit unsettling, particularly for members of Russia's elite, because, if somebody like Starovoit could be singled out for corruption, then who's next?
Is that very much the point, though, that perhaps there is a correlation between this step up in investigations for corruption and the war in Ukraine, to keep people quiet, to keep them towing the line, to keep them not questioning what President Putin is doing?
I think, yes, I think that if you want to look at motivations, definitely, because Putin, of course, knows all about the corruption, and most of his elite are corrupt. We know that. So singling out people usually has a political reason. But again, the flip side is that it's unsettling and destabilizing at this time.
This week, Donald Trump has reversed a decision to pause weapons shipments to Ukraine. He's now sending some of the Patriot missiles that had been held up, and he's accused Putin of talking BS over the war. But Putin has doubled down in his defiance. 2 nights of relentless, massive drone and missile attacks on Ukraine. What's going on? Is this brinkmanship?
Yes, I think it is. I think, first of all, everybody in the U.S. all the news media are talking about, Trump's sudden U-turn, and all of a sudden he's decided to turn against Putin, and isn't this wonderful? And now he's going to arm Ukraine. I would be a little bit cautious about this, because Trump says a lot of things and then he doesn't do them. We've seen the back and forth on the tariffs and, all sorts of things. So I think we have to look. I'm just going back a little bit to look at Trump's criticism of Putin, sort of in the context, and the context has been, up until now, Trump has pretty much refused to even acknowledge that Russia was the invader. At one point, a few weeks ago, he referred to the conflict as between. He made an analogy with 2 boys that are fighting each other or something. He's kind of downplayed just the atrociousness of this Russian invasion. So now, all of a sudden he's saying, well, I'm disappointed in Putin, and maybe he sort of casting these aspersions on him. But really, it isn't that much, frankly. And also, and I wouldn't expect Trump to really come out and denounce Putin or the Kremlin. I could be wrong, but also we have to be careful, because Trump is talking about, now we're going to start rearming Ukraine. We're going to get all these Patriot, he alluded to Patriot missiles and the things that Ukraine needs for its air defense. Some of this is already in Poland, but again, how far is Trump going to go? He could easily, in another week, kind of back off and say, well, we've given them enough. And he could back off his criticism of Putin. So at this point, I don't have great expectations.
I think perhaps one of the real significant pointers as to whether he's serious or not might be what he does about sanctions, mightn't it? Because he's saying he's looking very strongly at the Russian sanctions bill that's being proposed by the Senate. And that would impose 500% tariffs on any country that imports Russian uranium, gas or oil. That would be presumably quite effective. And the proof in the pudding will be, does Donald Trump go with this and put his money where his mouth is and actually does something?
Yes, again, he's having a serious look at the sanctions, and he's going to consider this bill. I am not holding my breath. It would be a very serious step, but I'm not quite sure. I look back on the history of Trump and Putin's relationship, going back to when Trump was first elected and denying that Russia interfered at all in the elections, and saying that he believed Putin. I think we need to wait and see. Now, as far as Russia's reaction to this Trump's quote unquote U-turn, it doesn't surprise me that all of a sudden they are just bombing the hell out of Kyiv, last night. They're doing really, really. Um, I think this was the largest military attack so far. But in a way, for Russia, it makes sense because basically what they're saying is, okay, you want to talk tough with us, but we can show you the damage that we can do to Ukraine right now. And so I mean, I think in a way it is kind of a reaction, and Russia doesn't have that much choice at this point. But this is their way of showing, we're gonna fight back.
And what will be really fascinating to see is how Ukraine actually follows up on any attacks into Russia itself, following on from the Spider's Web operation, which must have really rocked the Kremlin in terms of its confidence. And off the back of what happened with the airports this week, I'm just wondering, what kind of operations do you think would be most likely to cause the Kremlin to ask questions about the costs of continuing the war?
Wow. Well, I mean, they've paid so much in terms of costs already. It's almost like getting out now, it would be such a huge step. Well, I mean, obviously they would go to peace talks and make concessions and so forth. But as you know, thus far, the Kremlin has a red line, and they're not making any concessions. But yes, I mean, I think it was very impressive what the Ukrainians were able to do to smuggle these drones in and set them off. I mean, Ukraine they're very good with this sort of thing. I don't know. Of course, now Russia is alerted, and they're going to be probably a lot more careful. So I don't think it's clear, how much more Ukrainians can do right now. It would be great if they could continue doing the sort of thing that they've done. And if they were successful for example, using drones to destroy all these really important aircraft that Russia has, it would be great. But yeah, that could be an additional factor that might cause the Kremlin to reconsider. But I think also this business about how the public feels about the war is going to really play in.
There's been some keen media attention in recent days to the spate of tankers that have been hit by explosions while either in a Russian port or having recently visited Russia. And in all 6 cases, the latest, the Eco Wizard, 4 had recently visited Libya, and all except the Eco Wizard had a record of anchoring off Malta. And we don't know yet what caused these explosions, but people are pointing to the possibility of limpet mines being stuck onto the bottom of these vessels. And also there has been some kind of out there speculation that this could be kind of like a seaborne development to what happened in Operation Spider's Web. Of course, we don't know yet what's behind all of this, but how closely are you watching these developments?
Well, I think they're very significant. I think the last sort of explosion happened about June 27th. And yes, I mean, these are very significant in terms of the damage that it's done to Russian tankers. And I would say they're more vulnerable because they're not on Russian territory. Some of those explosions could have been linked to Libya, but we just simply don't know right now. But if they were, if it was a Ukrainian job, then that would be the kind of thing that I would expect we would see more of, because this is very, very damaging to Russia to have these tankers blown or have these explosions. So yeah, I mean, I think the Ukrainians are very good at this sort of thing.
We shall see and watch the latest updates on that. Just to turn to something that's been happening in London, this week 3 men were found guilty of setting fire to a warehouse housing Starlink satellite equipment destined for Ukraine. One had been recruited by the Vagner mercenary group. How involved is the Kremlin in outsourcing criminal activities to further its strategy, and what is that strategy overseas?
It doesn't surprise me that they would use members of the Wagner group, because they've always done the Kremlin's dirty work, all over Africa, so on and so forth. So I think that if so, in order for something like this to be done, it's pretty it's a pretty blatant attack, really, when you think about it, and having it happen, outside London, at this warehouse. I mean, it's pretty bold, but the Kremlin can use these surrogates, and then they can kind of back off, and if they're not tied directly to the Russian military or intelligence or something, they can just deny any connection. I mean, it's very interesting because, when we saw, and this isn't really similar, but when we saw, for example, the poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury, that was not a very good job that the Russians did, because it was revealed that the two people who carried out these poisonings actually had worked for the GRU, and they could be taught. And the GRU, the Russian military intelligence, works for the Kremlin. So those things could be directly tied, and it had big repercussions for Russia. So I think that it's much better for them to have a surrogate, and particularly the Wagner group are well trained, and they've done a lot of this dirty work.
As a specialist in Russian affairs yourself, finally, it must be a very interesting time to be observing and analysing what is going on. What has surprised you the most, and what do you find the most important to focus on at the moment?
What surprised me is that I noticed when Putin made this decision to invade Ukraine in February 2022, there was a lot of quite a few of the members of his Security Council and the members of his elite were not happy about this, and they were hesitant. Even members of the top military, they were told that this was going to be an easy thing to do, and Russia was just going to go right in, and they were going to take Kyiv and all this. And as you remember, it turned out to be kind of a failure. And so I kept expecting that somehow the Russian elite, who form the core of support for Putin, would kind of withdraw their support, and because Russia was doing very badly for a long time, and it's only been in the past year that it's been making these incremental grounds in Ukraine, but their offensive is still very slow. And so I guess I'm surprised that given the toll that it has taken on Russia and on members of the elite. Remember, they're all sanctioned. They can't go anywhere outside Russia. They've had their yachts taken away, and so on and so forth. And then, the huge numbers of losses. I guess I'm surprised that they're still holding together, because I'd always sort of hoped that there would be something that would push Putin out.
And now?
Now, I'm afraid, I will say one thing, and I think this is important. If Trump really follows through with these severe sanctions and really gives Ukraine the military hardware and assistance that it needs, this does make Putin look pretty bad, because, he's been sort of bragging about his friendship with Trump, just like Trump has bragged about his friendship with Putin. And up during the election campaign last summer, all up until November, the Russian media, the state-controlled media, all the talk shows and everything, they were all rooting for Trump. They all wanted Trump to, and of course, we know that within the Kremlin, they wanted Trump to win because they knew that Trump would bow to Putin and start to withdraw military aid. And maybe, remember, Trump was talking about taking the sanctions away. So yeah, all the Russian elite and the members of the Kremlin, they were all really happy to have Trump get elected. And now all of a sudden, he's not being friendly to Putin. Well, who's to blame? And I think it makes Putin look very bad. I do think it undermines his credibility.
We shall watch this with interest. Amy Knight, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Nice to talk to you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.